She pressed that baby girl against her chest so hard her arms had gone completely numb, and she still didn't loosen her grip. The rain was coming down in sheets across the Wyoming road, soaking straight through the quilt, soaking through her dress, soaking through everything she had left in this world, and what she had left wasn't much. 6 months of running, 3 states behind her, one man still hunting her, and a 6-month-old daughter whose breathing had started to sound wrong somewhere around the last creek crossing. Evelyn Brooks stood at the edge of that mud road and made herself a promise she didn't know if she could keep. She was not going to sit down, she was not going to cry, and she was absolutely not going to let Victor Brooks take her daughter. Then she heard wagon wheels. Before we go any further, if this is your first time on this channel, welcome. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notifications so you never miss a story. And when you leave a comment, tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go back to that Wyoming road, to that rain, and to the moment one man's simple decision changed 3 lives forever. The wagon came out of the dark slow and steady, the kind of pace a man sets when he's in no particular hurry and has no particular reason to be. Silas Mercer had made this drive from Harwick into his own property more times than he could count. 14 years on this land, 4 years of those years alone. He knew every rut in this road, every bend, every place where the creek ran close enough that you had to watch your left wheel. He wasn't paying attention to much of anything beyond getting home and getting dry when his lead horse threw her head up and shied hard to the right. Silas pulled back on the reins. Easy, girl, easy. He squinted through the rain and saw her standing there at the edge of the road. Just a shape at first. Then he made out the bundle she was holding against her chest, the way her shoulders were hunched forward over it, protecting it the way you'd protect the only thing that mattered. He pulled the wagon to a stop. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The rain filled the silence between them. "Ma'am," he said finally. "You all right?" She looked up at him. She had dark eyes that didn't waver, even soaking wet, even with exhaustion written into every line of her face. Whatever she'd been through, she hadn't let it break her bearing. She stood straight, even when she was clearly barely standing. "I'm fine," she said. Silas looked at the bundle in her arms. "That a baby?" 6 months. He looked at the road behind her. Empty. He looked at the road ahead of her. Empty. There wasn't a light or a building in either direction for a good 3 miles. "Where are you headed?" he asked. She hesitated, just briefly, just a flicker. But he caught it. "Somewhere dry," she said. He pulled his coat off an oilskin that wasn't much, but it kept the worst of the water out and held it down toward her. "Here, get up on the wagon and I'll take you to town." She didn't move. "I don't take charity," she said. Not harsh, just flat, like she'd said it enough times that it had lost any particular feeling. "It ain't charity," Silas said. "It's a coat and a ride." "I'm going that direction anyway." She looked at the coat. She looked at the baby in her arms. Something moved behind her eyes that she controlled before it reached her face. "I don't need to go to town," she said quietly. "I just need somewhere to get out of the rain for the night." "Somewhere I won't be." She stopped. "Won't be what?" he asked. She met his eyes. "Somewhere I won't be found." Silas studied her for a long moment. He was a man who'd spent enough years reading livestock and weather and land to know when something was carrying more weight than it showed on the surface. This woman was carrying a considerable amount of weight. "I got a barn," he said. "Dry, clean straw. You're welcome to it." Something in her shoulders dropped, just slightly. Just enough that he saw it. "Thank you," she said. "The barn would be fine." "No," Silas said. She blinked. No, you can't sleep in my barn." He climbed down from the wagon. "You can sleep where it's warm." Her name was Evelyn Brooks. He learned that much during the drive to the ranch, which took the better part of 40 minutes through rain that didn't let up for a single minute of it. He didn't push for more. He'd learned a long time ago that there was a difference between what a person would tell you and what they were ready to tell you, and pressing on that gap didn't help anybody. She sat on the bench beside him with the baby tucked inside his oilskin coat, held against her chest, her own arms wrapped around the outside of it. The baby had stopped fussing somewhere around the second mile, which he'd thought at first was a mercy, until he noticed that Evelyn kept pressing her cheek to the top of the baby's head, and her expression kept tightening each time she did. "She got a name?" he asked. "Lily," Evelyn said. "That's a pretty name." It was her grandmother's. He nodded. They rode quiet for a stretch. The horses knew the way even in the dark, which was good because the lantern on the wagon wasn't doing much against the rain. "She's warm," Evelyn said very quietly, not to him exactly. More like saying it out loud to make herself face it. "How warm?" Her voice stayed level, but her jaw tightened. "She was fine this morning. She was laughing this morning." Silas clicked his tongue at the horses. They picked up the pace. The ranch house came into view through the rain, and Silas pulled up to the front, not the barn, not the side, right to the front door. Evelyn noticed. I said you're sleeping where it's warm," he said. "That's the house." He climbed down and held his hand up to her. After a moment's pause that lasted exactly long enough to tell him she wasn't used to taking help, she took his hand and climbed down with the baby, held against her, with her other arm. Inside, he got the fire going in the main room while she stood near the door, with Lily still held tight to her chest. He could see her taking in the room the way a person does when they're trying to assess whether they're safe, quick eyes moving over exits and corners, calculating. Whatever had put her on that road in the dark had made her careful in a way that went bone deep. "You can sit down," he said. "I know I can," but she sat in the chair closest to the fire and unwrapped the coat from around Lily. He looked at the baby for the first time. She was small, with dark hair plastered to her head from the damp, and her cheeks were flushed, in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. Her eyes were half closed and glassy. "She needs to come down from that fever," he said. "I know that." Evelyn's voice was steady, but he heard the thing underneath it. The controlled terror of a mother who was doing the calculations in her head and didn't like the numbers. "I'll get water on to boil," Silas said. "Got some willow bark." "It's not much, but it'll help bring the fever down." Evelyn looked at him. "You know about willow bark?" "My wife used to keep it in the kitchen," he said. He said it the same way he said everything, matter of fact, no dramatizing it. "I kept it after habit, I guess." Something shifted in her expression. "How long has she been gone?" 4 years, he said. He was already moving toward the kitchen. "Sit close to the fire." "Keep Lily warm, but not too warm." He heard her voice follow him. "I'm sorry." "Yeah," he said. "Me too." He got the water on and found the willow bark in the tin where Margaret had always kept it, and he stood there for a moment with the tin in his hands in the quiet of his own kitchen, in the house that had been mostly silent for 4 years. And he listened to the sound of a woman talking quietly to a sick baby in the next room, saying her name over and over. "Lily, I've got you." "You're all right, I've got you." He set the tin down and got back to work. Evelyn didn't sleep that night. He didn't either. They sat on opposite sides of the fireplace with Lily between them in a nest of blankets. Silas had pulled down from the chest at the end of his bed, taking turns with the cool cloth, watching the clock on the mantel. Not talking much, but not pretending they were alone in it either. Around 2 in the morning, Lily's fever broke. She made a small sound, and then opened her eyes fully for the first time in hours, and she looked up at Silas with the blankly curious expression that babies have, like she was trying to decide if he was worth her attention. He held his finger out. She grabbed it. He didn't say anything. But something moved through him that he hadn't felt in 4 years. Something that had no name he wanted to give it, so he didn't try. "Thank you," Evelyn said from across the fire. She was watching him with Lily's small hand wrapped around his finger. "Don't need to thank me for sitting," he said. "Yes, I do," she said quietly. "Most people would have sent us to the barn." He looked at her. "I told you, the barn's for animals. We're strangers to you." "You were strangers," he said. "That was about 4 hours ago." She was quiet a moment, then she said, "I can't stay." "I want you to know that. When she's better, when it's safe to travel, I have to keep moving." "You don't have to tell me your business," he said. "I know. She looked down at Lily, who had closed her eyes again, her grip still on Silas's finger. "But you took us in, you stayed up all night, you deserve to know at least that much." "When you're ready," Silas said. "If you're ever ready." "It'll keep." She nodded once, and then she leaned her head back against the chair and closed her eyes, and within a few minutes her breathing had evened out into sleep. Silas sat there in the firelight with a baby's fingers wrapped around his and watched the storm outside finally begin to ease. He didn't think about the future. He didn't think about what he was doing or why. He just sat there, and for the first time in a long time, the house didn't feel empty. She was up before dawn. He heard her moving in the kitchen and came out to find her standing at the stove, with Lily settled in a folded blanket on the table beside her, awake and apparently interested in the ceiling, and a skillet on the heat with eggs already in it. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I told you," Evelyn said. "I don't take charity. I earn what I use." She glanced at him over her shoulder. "Sit down. There's coffee." He sat down at his own kitchen table, feeling slightly like a guest, which wasn't a feeling he'd had in a good while, and she set a cup in front of him without ceremony and went back to the eggs. "She seems better," he said, nodding toward Lily. "She is." Evelyn's whole posture had changed overnight. Still careful, still measured, but the controlled terror was gone. In its place was something more like purpose. Her color's good. "She's hungry. That's a good sign it is." She set a plate in front of him. Eggs, biscuits she'd made from somewhere he found out. Later she'd found his flour and shortening and made them herself while he was still asleep, and the rest of the coffee in his pot. "I'll need to mend that," she said, nodding at his sleeve where the cuff had frayed down to threads. "And your pantry needs organizing. Someone's been putting the salt next to the sugar for God knows how long." "I've been putting the salt next to the sugar," he said. "Yes," she said. "I could tell." He looked down at his plate so she wouldn't see him almost smile. She stayed 3 days, then a week, then 2. Neither of them announced it or negotiated it. It just happened the way things happen sometimes, one day at a time, each day making the next seem more natural than the last. Evelyn worked. That was the thing about her, she worked the way some people pray, like it was the one thing that kept her standing. She mended everything that needed mending. She reorganized the kitchen and the pantry and the mudroom, and then she asked him could she look at his accounts. And he pulled out the ledger books he'd more or less abandoned after Margaret died, and watched her sit down at the kitchen table with them, and go through them page by page with the focused expression of a woman who'd been keeping books her whole life. "You're short on your feed calculation for winter," she said. "I know. You're going to run out before February if you don't reorder." "I know that too." She looked up at him. "Have you been just knowing these things and not doing anything about them?" "There's a lot on the ranch," he said. "There's a lot on every ranch," she said. "That's not a reason." She went back to the ledger. "I'll write up a list of what you need, if you want." "I'd appreciate that," he said. She wrote the list. He placed the order. And then she found 3 errors in his previous 2 years of accounting that had been costing him money he didn't know he was losing. And she corrected them with a quiet efficiency that left him standing in his own kitchen, feeling like he'd been running his ranch half-blind without knowing it. "Where'd you learn to keep books like that?" he asked. She didn't look up. "My father ran a mercantile. I kept his books from the time I was 12, a pause. And then I kept my husband's." It was the first time she'd mentioned a husband. He waited, but she didn't add to it, so he didn't ask. Lily was learning his face. He noticed it around the 10th day, the way her eyes would follow him when he came into the room, the way she'd go from fussing to quiet when he picked her up, the way she'd grab for his shirt with both hands and hold on like she'd made a decision about him. It undid something in him every time, something he'd spent 4 years keeping nailed shut. He had a cradle in the back room. He'd built it himself the spring before Margaret died, when they'd both thought, that everything was going to go the way it was supposed to go. He'd built it out of good walnut wood, and he'd carved a little running horse along the side rail, because Margaret had loved horses. And then she was gone, and the baby was gone, and the cradle had just sat there, Because he couldn't bring himself to move it, and he couldn't bring himself to look at it. So he'd shut the door to that room and left it shut. He found himself thinking about it now, more than he wanted to. Lily slept in the main room in the folded blanket nest. She was fine there. She was warm, and she was safe. And every night Evelyn tucked her in with the same soft words and the same quiet patience. And every night Silas sat on the other side of the fire and told himself he was just keeping the fire up. Which was true, and he wasn't watching the two of them, which was not. One evening he came in from the barn to find Evelyn sitting at the table with the ledger closed and her hands flat on top of it, and a look on her face that he recognized as the expression a person wears when they've run out of work to use as armor. "You want some coffee?" he asked. She looked up. "Silas," she said. "I need to tell you something." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. She told him. Nathan Brooks had been a good man. She said that first, like it mattered to her that Silas understood it. He was a farmer in Missouri, not wealthy but solid. They'd had 40 acres, a good house, and plans for more. They'd been married 3 years when Lily was born, and he'd been so proud of that baby, he'd barely put her down for the first week of her life. He died in September. A horse kick, the kind of thing that happened on farms, and was over in a second and left nothing but silence behind it. He was there in the morning and gone by afternoon. "I'm sorry," Silas said. "Thank you." She said it the way he'd said thank you about Margaret receiving it, without making too much of it. What happened after was, she stopped, started again. Nathan had an older brother, Victor. They weren't close. Nathan didn't talk about him much, and what he did say wasn't fond. Victor had gone into banking, done well for himself. Thought that made him better than people who worked land. Silas nodded. He knew the type. 3 weeks after Nathan died, Evelyn said Victor arrived at my door. He said there were questions about the deed to the farm. That Nathan had owed him money. That there was paperwork. She pressed her hands flat on the table again. There wasn't any debt. I knew Nathan's accounts as well as I knew my own name. But Victor had a lawyer with him and a judge's letter, and he talked very fast and very confidently, and I was still not thinking straight. "You just buried your husband," Silas said. "Yes." She looked at him. "But that's not an excuse for being slow. It's not an excuse. It's just a fact." She held his gaze for a moment, and he could see her deciding whether to let that be enough. Then she went on. "He claimed the farm, said it was debt repayment. I contested it. But he had legal papers I didn't understand fast enough, and the judge in our county was Victor, knew him. Had done business with him." She shook her head. I could see what was happening. "I just couldn't stop it fast enough. What about Lily?" Her expression went completely still. "He claimed guardianship. Said a widowed woman with no land and no income couldn't properly raise a child." Her voice stayed level through pure force of will. He could hear the effort it took. He said he would provide a proper home for Lily. He said it very calmly, like it was reasonable, like she was property he had a claim to. Silas didn't say anything. "I left that night," Evelyn said. "I took Lily, I took what I could carry, and I left. I've been moving ever since. 3 states. She looked at him steadily. "He's been following us the whole time. He has men. He has money. He has all the things that make people listen to him instead of me." The fire crackled. Lily made a small sound in her sleep and settled again. "How do you know he's still following?" Silas asked. "Because he told me he would be," Evelyn said. "The night I left, I heard him on the road behind me for the first mile. He called out," he said. She paused. He said, "You can run as far as you like, Evelyn. The law runs further." Silas sat with that for a moment. "He's not wrong about that," he said, "but he's not entirely right either." She frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean the law goes as far as the man applying it has reach," Silas said. "And his reach ends somewhere." She looked at him carefully. "You sound like you've thought about this." "I've been thinking about it since you told me the first part," he said. "Which was the night you got here, when you said you needed somewhere you wouldn't be found." "You didn't say that for no reason." "No," she agreed. "I didn't." He leaned back in his chair. Word came in from town today, he said. I didn't know how to tell you, so I've been figuring out how. She went very still. A man came into Harwick 2 days ago, Silas said. Asking around about a woman traveling alone with a baby. Well-dressed man, had 2 other men with him, showed a photograph. Evelyn didn't move. Tom Geller at the feed store sent word out to the ranch, Silas said. Figured I might have seen something, being out on the roads as much as I am. Tom don't know you're here, but the man who's asking does know this general territory, and he's working his way out from town. For a long moment she didn't speak. Then she looked at Lily sleeping by the fire, and her face did something complicated and quiet that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite fury. It was all 3 of them held down under the surface by the same discipline that had kept her standing on that road in the rain. How long do you think? She asked. Day or 2, Silas said. Maybe less. She nodded once, slowly, like she was absorbing a blow and redistributing the weight of it. I'll be gone by morning, she said. No, you won't, Silas said. She looked at him. You've been running for 6 weeks, he said. Running just moves the problem down the road. It don't solve it. He folded his hands on the table. There's a circuit judge comes through Harwick next week. Cyrus Albright. He's been on this bench for 20 years, and he's got no patience for men who use courts like personal weapons. A judge won't help me, Evelyn said. I have no lawyer. You've got your husband's actual records, Silas said. You've got 6 weeks of running that tells a story all its own. And you've got a story to tell that a woman like you can tell a courtroom better than any lawyer could tell it for you. She stared at him. You don't know that. I just watched you take 4 years of bad bookkeeping and put it right in 2 days, he said. You know how to find the truth in numbers, and you know how to make it clear. That's the same skill. It is different, he agreed. It's harder, but running's not going to work anymore. He's here, he's got men, and he's got money, and he knows what he's doing. He met her eyes. The only thing he doesn't have is the truth, and that's yours. Evelyn looked at him for a long time in the firelight. He held her gaze and didn't look away, because he meant it, and she needed to know he meant it. If it goes wrong, she said quietly, he takes Lily. Yes, Silas said. That's the risk. She looked at her daughter. At that small sleeping shape with both fists curled up beside her face, all of 6 months old and the entire reason for every mile of the last 6 weeks. Why are you doing this? Not suspicious. Just genuinely asking. You don't know me. We've been here barely 2 weeks. You don't owe us anything. He thought about what to say. He wasn't a man who usually needed long to say a thing, but this one took him a moment. 4 years ago, he said, I sat in this house by myself, and I thought about what kind of man I wanted to be for whatever time I had left on this earth. Margaret was gone. He stopped briefly, started again. I'd lost what I thought was going to be my whole future. And I had to figure out what was left. He looked at the fire. What was left was this ranch, and the work, and the question of whether I was going to be the kind of man who helps or the kind of man who doesn't. He looked back at her. That's all this is, Evelyn. I'm just trying to be the kind of man who does. She held his gaze, and then she looked down at the table and her shoulders dropped slightly, not in defeat, something else. Something like a person, setting down a weight they've been carrying so long they'd forgotten. It wasn't supposed to be permanent. All right, she said quietly. All right? He asked. She said again. I'll stay. I'll talk to the judge. He nodded. But I want to be clear, she said. And there was something that almost resembled steel in her voice, which didn't surprise him at all. I'll tell my own story. I don't need anyone to speak for me. I know that, Silas. So do I, he said. I'll stand beside you. I won't stand in front of you. She looked at him for one more long moment. Then she nodded. In the corner of the room, Lily slept on, unaware that the course of her whole life had just been decided by 2 people sitting quietly at a kitchen table in the firelight, while the last of the storm moved off to the east and left the Wyoming night clear and cold and full of stars. She woke before he did again. That was the thing about Evelyn Brooks, she didn't waste mornings. Silas had spent 4 years letting mornings happen to him, letting the light come in and find him already half defeated before he'd pulled his boots on. She didn't operate that way. By the time he came out of his room, she had coffee on, Lily fed, and a look on her face that told him she'd been thinking hard since long before sunrise. "You slept," she said. "Sit down." He sat. She set coffee in front of him, and then sat across from him and folded her hands on the table, the way she did when she was about to say something she'd already decided on. "I want to know everything you know about Victor," she said. "Not what I told you. What you found out from Tom Geller and whoever else." "Everything." Silas wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "Tom said the man gave his name as Victor Brooks. Said he was acting on behalf of a legal matter involving his deceased brother's estate. Had papers. Had a letter from a Missouri court. A Missouri court has no authority in Wyoming territory," she said. "No," Silas agreed. "But it has the appearance of authority, and for most people that's enough." "What else?" "He's staying at the Harwick Hotel. The two men with him aren't lawyers. Tom said they were the kind of men who stand close to other men and don't say much." "Hired muscle," Evelyn said flatly. "That's my reading." She nodded. "He did the same thing in Missouri. He doesn't dirty his own hands. He pays other people to look threatening while he talks in legal language." She picked up her own coffee cup and set it down again without drinking. "He's smart, I'll give him that. He knows exactly how much fear costs and he's willing to spend it." "Smart and right are different things," Silas said. "Yes." She looked at him. "What do you know about Judge Albright?" "Known him 15 years. He came through after the Fenton land dispute in '81 and handled it without anyone getting shot, which was more than most people expected." "He doesn't like being used." Silas paused. "He really doesn't like when men with money try to use his court as a collection system." Something shifted in Evelyn's expression. Not hope exactly, but the possibility of it, like a door she hadn't known, had just revealed itself in the wall. "When does he arrive?" she asked. 6 days, Silas said. "Maybe 7. He usually comes through on a Thursday." She did the arithmetic in her expression. "Victor won't wait 6 days." "No," Silas said. "He won't. So we have to get through whatever he does first before I can get to the judge." She said it steady, without drama, like she was talking about a weather problem. "That's about the shape of it," Silas agreed. She stood up, picked up Lily from the folded blanket, settled the baby against her shoulder, and stood at the window with her back to him. He watched her think. It was something to watch. Her thinking wasn't the scattered, anxious kind, it was organized, sequential, like she was moving pieces across a board she'd mapped out already. "He'll come to the ranch," she said. "He won't go to the sheriff first. He'll come here, make it personal, try to rattle me into making a mistake or into running again." "Probably," Silas said, "and if I run, he has justification to pursue. And if I make a mistake, he uses it." She turned from the window. "Then I won't run and I won't make a mistake." She said it like a fact. Like it was already done. Silas looked at her. "All right," he said. "You said you'd stand beside me," she said. "Not in front of me." "I meant it. I need you to mean it when it's harder than it sounds," she said. "Because when he comes, he's going to try to talk to you instead of me. He's going to act like I'm not in the room. Men like Victor always do that. They look for the nearest man to negotiate with because they don't believe a woman has anything worth hearing." Her eyes were steady on his. "I need you to not let him do that. I need you to step back and point him at me every single time." Silas nodded once. "I can do that. It's going to be difficult," she said. "It's going to feel like the wrong instinct." "My instincts aren't always right," Silas said. "Yours seem to be. I'll follow your lead." She looked at him for a moment with an expression he couldn't entirely read. Then she nodded and sat back down with Lily in her lap and reached for her coffee like the matter was settled. Which he supposed it was. The next 2 days moved the way days move when you're waiting for something fast in the wrong places and slow in the ones where you wanted them to go faster. Silas worked the ranch. Evelyn worked the house and the books and carried Lily on one hip while she did it, which should have looked impractical and somehow didn't. The neighbors who came by, 3 of them over the course of those 2 days, because word had gotten out the way it always did in small territories, left looking thoughtful in a way that suggested Evelyn had made an impression. Martha Geller came on the second morning, Tom's wife, 60 years old, and built like someone who'd spent those 60 years arguing with the land, and mostly winning. She came with a jar of preserves and the look of a woman with an agenda. "You must be the woman Silas found on the road," she said to Evelyn, direct, no preamble. "I must be," Evelyn said, equally direct. Martha looked her over. Then she looked at Lily. Then she said, "The man in town's been asking about you." "I know," Evelyn said. "Would you like coffee?" Martha blinked. Then she laughed, short and approving. "Yes, I would." She set her preserves on the table and sat down. "He told Tom you'd stolen the baby." Evelyn set the coffee down without rattling the cup. "She's my daughter. Her name is Lily. She's 6 months old." She sat across from Martha and met her eyes. "My husband died in September. His brother decided that entitled him to my farm and my child. I've been traveling for 6 weeks with nowhere to land." She paused. "That's the truth, all of it." Martha looked at her for a long moment. "You got proof of any of it?" "I have my husband's original deed, his accounting records, and 3 letters from my father-in-law, Nathan's father, not Victor's, confirming Victor's history of financial manipulation within the family. I kept them inside Lily's blanket lining the entire journey." Evelyn held Martha's gaze. "I also have 6 weeks of being chased across 3 states by a man with hired men." "That tells a story on its own." Martha was quiet, then she said, "Judge Albright comes through Thursday." "I know. You planning to talk to him?" "That's exactly what I'm planning to do." Martha picked up her coffee cup, drank, set it down. "Tom can write a statement," she said, "about the man coming into the feed store with a photograph. The questions he asked, the way he described you." She looked at Evelyn steadily. "That might be useful. A witness to how this man operates." Evelyn's expression didn't collapse into gratitude. It stayed steady, but something in it opened just slightly. "I'd appreciate that very much, Mrs. Geller." "Martha." "Martha." Martha stood, buttoned her coat, and picked up nothing because she'd left the preserves on purpose. "You tell Silas I'll be back Thursday." She looked at Lily one more time, with the expression of a woman who'd raised 2 children of her own, and knew a healthy baby from a troubled one. "She's a good-looking child." "She is," Evelyn agreed. Martha left. Evelyn sat at the table for a moment after the door closed, her hand flat on the surface, her eyes on the middle distance. Then she picked up her pen and went back to the notes she'd been organizing. Silas came in from the barn 10 minutes later and found her writing. "Martha stopped by," he said. "I know," she said. "She offered Tom's testimony." He stopped. "She did? People respond to honesty if you give it to them straight," Evelyn said, not looking up. "She came in expecting to find out if I was lying. I didn't give her anything to work with except the truth." She turned a page. "Tom's statement about Victor asking around town is going to matter. It shows a pattern of conduct. It shows he's been pursuing, not just exercising legal rights." Silas looked at her. "You thought about this?" "I've had 6 weeks to think about it," she said. "I've gone over it every way it can go. I know what he has. I know what I have. The question is whether the judge cares about the difference." She looked up at him finally. "Do you think Albright will care?" "Yes," Silas said. "I think he'll care." She nodded and went back to writing. Victor Brooks arrived on the morning of the 3rd day. Silas was out in the yard when he came up the road, a black carriage, well maintained, 2 men on horseback flanking it. Victor himself climbed down before the carriage had fully stopped, which told Silas something about his confidence. He was perhaps 50, broad through the shoulders, dressed in the kind of clothes that were meant to signal serious money to people who cared about that. He looked at Silas and smiled. "Mr. Mercer," he said. "I appreciate you receiving us. My name is Victor Brooks. I believe you may have encountered my sister-in-law during your travels." "Morning," Silas said. Victor waited for more. When none came, he smiled again, slightly tighter. "I wonder if we might speak inside. I have some documents that—" "You can speak out here," Silas said, "or you can wait. Evelyn does her own talking." Victor's smile went through a rapid series of adjustments. I'm sorry, she'll be out directly, Silas said. Anything you've got to say, you can say to her. Mr. Mercer. Victor's voice took on the patient tone of a man explaining something to someone he considered slow. I understand you've shown considerable hospitality to this woman. That speaks well of you, but you should be aware that the situation is more complicated than she's likely represented. There are legal matters. Morning, Victor. Both men turned. Evelyn had come out of the house with Lily on her hip and the composure of a woman walking into a room she'd furnished herself. She stopped at the edge of the porch, 3 feet above them on the step, which meant they were looking up at her. Victor's expression shifted. He hadn't expected her to be calm. Silas could see that plainly. He'd expected tears or flight, and he'd gotten neither, and it had knocked him slightly off his script. Evelyn, he recovered quickly. You look well, I am well, she said. Thank you for coming all this way. The pleasantness in her voice was entirely genuine and entirely armor. I assume you have the paperwork you showed to the judge in Cooper County. I'd like to see it. Victor blinked. I beg your pardon? The paperwork. The debt claim, the custody petition. She shifted Lily to her other hip. I'd like to see the documents. I've had some time to review Nathan's actual accounts, and I have questions. One of the men on horseback moved slightly. Evelyn didn't look at him. Evelyn, Victor said, and his voice dropped into something softer and more dangerous. I'm not your enemy. I'm trying to protect Lily's future. A woman alone traveling across the frontier, this is no life for an infant. She's thriving, Evelyn said. She had a fever 2 nights ago, Victor said. The air changed. Silas didn't move, Evelyn didn't move. But something passed between all 3 of them that wasn't any of their words. She did, Evelyn said calmly. She's recovered, but I'm curious how you know that. Victor said nothing. Victor, her voice stayed level. Completely level. Who did you pay in Harwick to watch this ranch? Victor smiled. No one's watching anyone. I simply ask questions. People talk. Yes, Evelyn said. They do. And what they'll tell Judge Albright on Thursday is going to be very interesting. That landed. Silas saw it land. The name Albright did something to Victor's careful composure, didn't crack it, but shifted it, the way a structure shifts when one of the foundation points suddenly looks less solid than it did before. I wasn't aware you'd retained legal counsel, Victor said. I don't have a lawyer, Evelyn said. I don't need one. I have Nathan's deed, his accounts, 3 letters from your father, documenting your financial conduct within the family before Nathan and I married. And a witness willing to testify that you arrived in this territory, with hired men asking questions about a woman you've characterized in your legal filings as having abandoned family property. She paused. Did you think I'd been running because I was afraid of you, Victor? I was running because I needed to get far enough ahead of you to stop. Her eyes held his with something that wasn't fury and wasn't contempt, but was something more durable than both. I've stopped. Victor was quiet for a long moment. His 2 men on horseback looked at each other. Then he said, whatever you think you have isn't going to. Victor, she said, we're done talking for today. You know where I am. The judge will hear both of us on Thursday. If you have documents that contradict what I have, bring them. She shifted Lily on her hip again. If you try to come onto this property again before Thursday, Silas will be well within his rights to involve the territorial sheriff. Good morning. She turned and went back inside. Just like that. Like it was done, because she'd decided it was done. Victor stood in the yard with his mouth slightly open. Silas stood next to him with his mouth closed, which required some effort, because the thing he wanted to do most in the world right now was smile, and he was fairly sure that wasn't going to help. Victor looked at Silas. She's going to lose, he said. Quiet, private, not for the benefit of his men. I want you to know that. Whatever she's told you about those documents, a territorial judge isn't going to overturn a Missouri court ruling over a woman's personal papers. Could be, Silas said. Whatever you think you owe her. I don't think I owe her anything, Silas said. I think she's right. Those are different things. He looked at Victor steadily. You should head back to town, Mr. Brooks. Thursday's 6 days off, and there's nothing more to be done here before then. Victor held his gaze for another moment. Then he walked back to his carriage, and his men fell in around him, and they went back down the road the way they'd come. Silas waited until they were out of sight. Then he went inside. Evelyn was sitting at the kitchen table. Lily was on her lap. Her hands were pressed flat on the table again, and she was breathing in a slow, controlled way that told him that he'd seen on the porch had cost her something. "You all right?" he asked. "Give me a minute," she said. He gave her a minute. He poured more coffee and sat down and waited. After a moment, she said, "He has someone watching the house." "I'll find out who," Silas said. "Don't make trouble over it." She looked up. "He wants trouble. He wants something he can point to and say, 'I'm in an unstable situation.' Every quiet day I have here is ammunition against him." "All right," Silas said. "No trouble." He paused. "That was some of the finest talking I've ever seen, for what it's worth." She let out a breath, not quite a laugh. "I had it memorized. Every word of it. I've been going over it since you told me he was in town." She looked at her hands. "I don't know if it worked." "It worked," Silas said. "You named your evidence, you named Albright, and you named his conduct. He came here with a plan, and you took it out of his hands in about 2 minutes. He's going to come back harder on Thursday," she said. "Yes," Silas agreed. She nodded. She picked up her coffee and drank it. Lily patted her hand with both palms, which was apparently something Lily did when she wanted attention. And Evelyn looked down at her daughter with the expression she always had. When she looked at Lily, something so unguarded, it was almost hard to watch. "She's going to know what I did for her," Evelyn said softly. "Someday, she's going to understand." She looked up at Silas. "That's the only thing I've held on to this whole time. That someday she's going to know." Silas looked at them, mother and daughter, in the morning light. This woman who'd held herself together with pure iron will across 6 weeks and 3 states, and a rainstorm and a sick night and a kitchen on his front porch, and he thought about the cradle in the back room, and then stopped thinking about. Because that was a road he wasn't ready to walk down yet. "She'll know," he said. "No question in my mind." The 4 days between Victor's visit and Thursday were the kind of days that burn themselves into memory, not because of any single thing that happens, but because of the particular quality of the tension in them. The ranch hummed with it. The work got done, Silas's work. Evelyn's work, and Lily grew more deliberate in her movements each day, pulling herself up on anything within reach, falling. Pulling up again with an expression of total determination that made both of them laugh without planning to. Out loud. Genuine laughter, the kind that surprised you. She got the laugh from her mother. Silas figured that out on the 4th day. When he came in from checking the east fence line and found Evelyn standing at the stove with Lily in the crook of her arm, and something cooking that smelled like it might actually be the best thing he'd eaten in 4 years, and she was laughing at something Lily had done, just laughing, full and clear and unguarded. He stood in the doorway for a moment before she heard him. He wasn't trying to be quiet. He just needed that moment before it ended. She turned when she heard him, and the laughter settled into a smile. "She knocked the flower off the shelf," Evelyn said. With purpose, she reached for it deliberately. "She's got range," Silas said. "She's going to have opinions," Evelyn said, and there was so much love in the way she said it that the whole room felt warmer. He washed up and sat down, and she put food in front of him without ceremony, the way she always did. And Lily sat on the folded blanket on the table between them, batting at a wooden spoon, with the focus of someone engaged in very important work. And Silas thought about how many meals he'd eaten alone at this table in 4 years, and how the aloneness of them hadn't ever fully registered until it was suddenly gone. He didn't say any of that. There wasn't a version of it that came out right. But he thought it. "You haven't told me much about her," Evelyn said. He looked up. "Who, your wife?" She met his eyes and held them, direct as always. "You've asked about Nathan." "I haven't asked about her." "Maybe I should have earlier." He was quiet for a moment. "Margaret," he said. "Margaret," she repeated. He paused. He didn't have a lot of practice putting Margaret into words, because he'd spent 4 years not putting her into words. "She was smarter than me." Considerably, read everything she could get her hands on. She used to order books from back east, and they'd come in on the freight wagon, and she'd have them read inside a week. He looked at the table. She liked this ranch, said it felt like something that was supposed to exist. What happened? Not gently, not harshly. Just baby came early, Silas said. 6 weeks. There was a doctor in Cheyenne, but Cheyenne was a day's ride and it went too fast. He paused. She and the baby both. Evelyn said nothing. She just held the silence open for him, which was the right thing to do, and he recognized it. Boy, he said. We were going to call him Thomas. After her father, Evelyn's hand moved across the table and covered his. Just briefly. She didn't say she was sorry, which was the right call, because he'd heard he was sorry enough times that it had become a kind of white noise, and what she did instead said more. He turned his hand over and held hers for a moment, and then let go, and they went back to eating, and Lily knocked the wooden spoon off the table with tremendous satisfaction. There's a room, Silas said. At the bay built a cradle for Thomas. It's still there, stilled. I shut the door 4 years ago, he said. Couldn't move it and couldn't look at it. He looked at Lily. Been thinking about it lately. Evelyn looked at him carefully. Silas, I'm not saying anything, he said quickly. That's not what this is. I just thought you should know it exists. In case Lily needed somewhere better than the blanket nest. She held his gaze. He held hers. Something passed between them that neither of them named because it was too early to name it, and they were both smart enough to know that. I'll think about it, she said finally. That's all I'm asking, he said. Wednesday night it rained again. Not the fierce driving storm of the night he'd found her, but steady and cold, the kind that settled in and meant business. Silas lay awake listening to it and thinking about Thursday, running through every version of it he could imagine. Trying to find the one where Victor walked out of that courtroom, with anything he'd come for and not being able to construct it convincingly if Evelyn got to speak. She was good. He'd seen it twice now on the porch, and in the way she'd talked to Martha. She had a quality of steadiness that was more persuasive than passion, because it read as certainty rather than argument, and certainty was what a judge wanted to see. But Victor had money and legal paper and a Missouri court ruling. Those weren't nothing. He got up around 2 in the morning and went to get water. The kitchen was dark except for the fire he'd banked before bed. He was reaching for the water jug when he heard the creak of the floorboard behind him. He turned. Evelyn was standing in the doorway in the dark. Couldn't sleep either, she said. No, she came in and sat at the table. He set the water down and sat across from her. I'm scared, she said. Just flat out, no dramatizing, the way she said things. I know, he said. I'm not scared for myself, she said. I can lose everything, and I'll figure out what comes next. I always have. She looked at her hands. If he gets Lily. He won't, Silas said. You don't know that. No, he agreed. I don't know it, but I believe it. He leaned forward. You have the truth, Evelyn. A full truth with documents and witnesses and 6 weeks of conduct that tells a story a fair judge can read plain as day. That's not nothing. She looked up. Her eyes were dry and direct. What if Albright isn't fair? Then we find another court, Silas said. We go up the chain. There's a territorial court above Albright and a federal circuit above that. Victor's reach goes far, but it doesn't go all the way to the top of the federal system without somebody noticing. That could take years, she said. It could, he said. But it won't come to that. He held her gaze. I've known Cyrus Albright for 15 years, Evelyn. I've never seen him rule in favor of a man who was clearly using his court as a weapon. It's the thing he takes most personally. She was quiet for a long moment. Outside the rain came down steady and cold. I keep thinking about Nathan, she said. He would have been furious. Not loud, Nathan wasn't loud. But he would have been just absolutely incandescent at what Victor's done. Using grief, using the law, using a baby. She shook her head slowly. He would have been in that courtroom with everything he had. You're doing exactly what he would have done, Silas said. Just doing it yourself. She looked at him. That's not a small thing, he said. Most people in your situation would have given up by now. Or given in. You didn't do either. He meant it, and she heard that he meant it, and for once she didn't redirect it or minimize it. "Thank you," she said, quietly. "Get some sleep," he said. "Tomorrow's going to need everything you've got." She nodded and stood and went back to the door. She stopped there for a moment, with her back to him. "Silas," she said, "Yat cradle." She didn't turn around. "The one you built. I think if you're willing, I'd like to put Lily in it tonight." A pause. "Not because she needs it. Because I think that room has been empty long enough." He didn't answer for a moment. He couldn't. Something had closed his throat. "All right," he said. She turned around and looked at him. And then she went to get Lily, and he went to the back room, and he opened the door he hadn't opened in 4 years, and he carried the cradle out into the warmth of the main room, and she laid her daughter in it. And Lily made one small sound and then settled like she'd always belonged there. Silas stood back. He looked at that cradle, the one he'd built for a boy named Thomas who'd never come home, and watched it hold a girl named Lily who had. He didn't sleep after that either, but it wasn't the same kind of awake. It was something else entirely, something that had no name yet but was looking for one. He was already hitching the horses when she came out of the house Thursday morning. She had Lily on one hip and Nathan's ledger books under her other arm, wrapped in oilskin the way she'd carried them across 3 states, and she was wearing the one dress she had that wasn't worn through at the elbows. She'd pressed it the night before, with a flat iron heated on the stove, working in the lamplight after she'd thought he was asleep. He'd heard the sound of it from his room and hadn't said anything. She looked at him. He looked at her. "Ready?" he said. "No," she said. "Let's go anyway." He helped her up onto the wagon bench and handed Lily up after, and they went down the road toward Harwick in the early cold with the sky just starting to come gray in the east, and neither of them talking much, which was fine. They'd said what needed saying the night before. What was left now was just the doing of it. Lily was awake and interested in the sky, the way she'd gotten interested in things lately, with her whole face, pointing at nothing in particular, and looking at her mother like she expected an explanation. "Bird," Evelyn told her, though there weren't any birds visible. "That's the direction birds come from." Lily appeared satisfied with this. Silas kept his eyes on the road. Tom said he'd be there. "And Martha." "I know," Evelyn said. "Doc Harlan's agreed to speak to Lily's condition when you arrived. Attests to her health now, the state she was in that first night." Silas: "Yeah. I know who's coming, she's all of it." A pause. "I appreciate you checking." He almost smiled. "Just checking." They hit the edge of Harwick as the sun cleared the ridge, and even from the far end of the main street, Silas could see that something was different about the town this morning. There were more horses at the rail than a Thursday warranted. People on the boardwalk who didn't have immediate business being there. The particular quality of stillness that settled over a small town when it knew something was about to happen and had made a collective decision to witness it. Word had traveled. Of course it had. In a town this size, word always traveled. He pulled up in front of the courthouse, which was also the land office, and the post office, and the room where the church ladies held their quilting circle on Saturdays. Because in Harwick, everything was several things at once and helped Evelyn down. She smoothed her dress with one hand, held Lily tight with the other, and looked at the people watching from the boardwalk without flinching. Martha Geller materialized from the small crowd with the efficiency of a woman who'd been positioned there deliberately. "Judge Albright's already inside," she said. "Been here since yesterday afternoon." Victor Brooks arrived an hour ago with his lawyer. Evelyn's expression didn't change. He brought a lawyer. "From Cheyenne," Martha said. "Expensive looking." "Good," Evelyn said. Martha blinked at that. "An expensive lawyer means he's worried," Evelyn explained. If he thought this was settled, he'd have walked in alone. She went up the steps and through the door without waiting for either of them. Silas and Martha exchanged a look. "Lord," Martha said quietly. "Yeah," Silas agreed and followed her in. The room was already full. Half of Harwick seemed to have found a reason to be inside the courthouse on a Thursday morning, arranged in rows of chairs that somebody had dragged in from the church hall. Judge Cyrus Albright sat at the head table, with the particular stillness of a man who'd presided over enough difficult hearings that other people's agitation no longer reached him. He was 63, thin, with a white beard, and the eyes of someone who'd spent decades sorting truth from performance, and had gotten very efficient at it. Victor Brooks was at a table on the left with a man in a gray suit who had the organized, expensive look of a lawyer who billed by the quarter hour. Victor himself was composed. He'd had time to reset from the porch confrontation, and he'd used it well. He sat straight, hands folded, looking like a man engaged in an unfortunate but necessary legal process, which was exactly the impression he intended to give. He looked at Evelyn when she came in. She looked at him. Neither acknowledged the other. Evelyn set the oilskin-wrapped ledgers on the table to the right and sat down. She settled Lily in her lap, straightened her back, and looked at Judge Albright. Albright looked back at her. Then he looked at Silas, who had taken a seat in the front row of observers rather than at the table, which he decided on the drive-in was the right choice. Evelyn had asked him to stand beside her, not in front of her. He was going to honor that, even when it was difficult. "We'll call this matter to order," Albright said. His voice was the kind that didn't need to be loud to carry. "I've reviewed the filing from the Missouri Circuit Court that Mr. Brooks's counsel submitted yesterday evening. I've also received this morning a separate submission from the respondent." He looked at Evelyn. "That would be you, Mrs. Brooks." "Yes, Your Honor," Evelyn said. "You prepared this yourself?" "I did." Albright looked at the papers in front of him for a moment. Something in his expression shifted not dramatically, but Silas caught it. Counsel for the petitioner may make his opening statement. The gray-suited lawyer stood and made his case for 12 minutes. He was good at it, organized, careful, never overstating, building a picture of a concerned family member, acting in a child's best interest, a deceased man's estate handled improperly by a grieving and unstable widow. A legal obligation to ensure the child's welfare. He was very careful never to say anything that was technically false. He just arranged the true things in an order that pointed the wrong direction. When he finished, Albright looked at Evelyn. "Mrs. Brooks." She stood. She didn't have notes in front of her. She'd memorized what she needed, and she knew where the documents were in the stack. She'd organized it all the night before, while he was awake in the next room not sleeping. "Your Honor," she said, "I want to start with something Mr. Brooks's counsel did not mention. My husband Nathan Brooks died on September 14th. Victor Brooks arrived at my door 22 days later." She paused to let that settle. "Not to offer condolences, not to assist with arrangements. He arrived with a lawyer and a document claiming Nathan owed him a debt of $1,400 with no prior record of this debt in any of Nathan's accounts." She opened the ledger. "Nathan kept meticulous records. I kept them with him. In 7 years of marriage and 3 years prior to that when he ran the farm himself, there is no record, not a single entry of any financial transaction with Victor Brooks." The room was very quiet. "The deed claim followed 4 days later," she continued. "Based on an alleged lien document that Nathan never mentioned, that appears in no correspondence, and that was witnessed by a notary public who, as I found in subsequent research, has performed notary services exclusively for Victor's bank for the past 11 years. She set one document on the table in front of Albright. "That's the notary's business registration record, Your Honor. And here is the lien document itself." She set a second paper beside it. "You'll notice the ink color is slightly different on the signature line than on the body of the document." Albright leaned forward. He picked up both documents and looked at them. His face gave nothing away, but he looked for a long time. Victor's lawyer leaned toward Victor and said something low and fast. Victor kept his face still. "I left Missouri 22 days after Victor filed the custody petition," Evelyn continued. "I want to be precise about why. It was not because I was unstable or incapable. It was because the judge in Cooper County had previously ruled in favor of Victor's bank in 3 separate matters, and when I attempted to file my own counter-documentation, The clerk told me directly that the judge would not schedule a hearing before Victor's petition would automatically advance. She looked at Albright steadily. I did not run from the law. I ran from a process that had been arranged to prevent me from speaking before it concluded. She paused, and I ran toward a process where I could speak. Which is here, which is now. The room had gone the kind of quiet where you could hear people breathing. I have, she said, Nathan's original deed, filed correctly and confirmed by the Territorial Land Office in Missouri in 1882. I have 3 letters from Victor and Nathan's father, written before Nathan and I married, documenting Victor's history of attempting to absorb family property through debt instruments. I have a sworn statement from Tom Geller of Harwick, who observed Victor Brooks arrive in this territory with 2 hired men and proceed to surveil private property before filing or serving any legal notice. She set the stack of documents on the table. And I have Lily. She looked down at her daughter in her arms. Lily is 6 months old. She is healthy and loved, and she has never for a single moment of her life lacked for care. Whatever Victor Brooks has told this court about my fitness as a mother, I would invite the court to look at this child and make its own assessment. She sat down. The room stayed quiet for another moment. Then it erupted, not loudly, not chaotically, but in the particular way a room full of people exhales all at once when they've been holding their breath without knowing it. Albright let it run for 5 seconds, then he said order, and it stopped. He looked at Victor's lawyer counsel. The lawyer stood again. He was good. Silas had to give him that because he adjusted fast. Your Honor, whatever questions may exist about specific documents, the fundamental issue remains Mrs. Brooks's ability to provide a stable environment. She's been in Wyoming territory for approximately 2 weeks, Albright said. Yes, Your Honor, in the home of a man who is not her. A man who found her on the road in a rainstorm and provided shelter, Albright said. Is that the instability you're referencing? Because from where I sit, that sounds like a community functioning the way a community is supposed to function. The lawyer paused. The Missouri court's ruling. The Missouri court's ruling is based on documentation I now have significant questions about, Albright said. He set down the 2 papers, the notary registration and the lien document, and looked at Victor directly for the first time. Mr. Brooks, did you prepare the lien document yourself, or was it prepared by counsel? Victor kept his composure. It was prepared by my bank's legal team, Your Honor. And the notary? A notary regularly employed by the bank. A notary who has no record of independent practice, Albright said. Who works exclusively for your institution. That's not unusual for a bank of... It's not unusual, Albright agreed. It is, however, relevant when the document in question shows physical inconsistencies, and the signatory has no independent relationship with either party. He looked at the paper again. I'm going to need this document examined by an independent hand before I proceed. Victor's lawyer started to speak. Albright raised one finger and the lawyer stopped. I'm also going to need an explanation, Albright said, for why a man with legitimate legal claims chose to arrive in this territory with hired men, conduct surveillance of private property, and approach the respondent directly before making any contact with this court. He looked at Tom Geller, who was sitting in the second row. Mr. Geller, you submitted a statement. Tom stood up. He was a big man, quiet, with the reliability of someone who'd never said anything he didn't mean. Yes, Your Honor. Victor Brooks came into my store 6 days ago and showed me a photograph of a woman and a baby and asked whether I'd seen them. He described her as a missing person. When I told him I didn't know the woman, he asked specific questions about which ranches were outside town on the North Road. He paused. He didn't mention anything about legal proceedings. Thank you, Mr. Geller, Albright said. Tom sat. Albright looked at Victor for a long moment with the expression of a man who had finished sorting and had arrived at a conclusion he didn't find pleasant but wasn't surprised by. I'm going to recess for 1 hour, Albright said. During that time I'll review the documentation, Mrs. Brooks has submitted in full. I'd also like to speak with both parties separately. He stood. Mrs. Brooks, you'll remain available. Yes, Your Honor, Evelyn said. Mr. Brooks, I'd like you to ask your lawyer to step outside. Victor's composure slipped, just slightly, just for a moment. But Silas saw it, and from the minute shift in Evelyn's posture he could tell she saw it too. The hour that followed was the longest hour Silas could remember since the night Margaret died. He sat on the bench outside the courthouse with Lily in his arms. Evelyn had handed her over before going in to speak with Albright, matter-of-factly. The way she handed him things when she needed both hands, and he sat there with this 6-month-old who had absolutely no opinion about territorial law and a very strong opinion about his shirt button, which she was currently attempting to remove. Martha came and sat beside him. She didn't say anything. He didn't say anything. They sat. Victor's lawyer came out of the courthouse and stood on the steps making the face of a man recalculating. Victor himself didn't come out, which meant Albright had him inside, which meant the conversation was not going the direction Victor had planned for it. "She's going to win," Martha said finally. "Looks that way," Silas said. "You knew she would," he thought about that. "I knew she deserved to," he said. "That's not always the same thing." Martha looked at him sideways. "You like her, Martha. I'm not being improper, I'm being observant." She folded her hands in her lap. "She's a remarkable woman, Silas. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know." He didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer, and Martha had the grace not to push it further. Lily succeeded in partially detaching the button. She held it up to show him with an expression of enormous satisfaction. "Don't swallow that," he told her. She looked at him like the thought had never crossed her mind. When Evelyn came back out of the courthouse, she walked straight to him, which was how he knew something had happened. Not something bad, her face wasn't carrying bad news, but something that had hit her harder than she'd expected, and she'd come to him first before she had time to arrange her expression around it. She sat down beside him. He handed Lily back. She held the baby against her chest and breathed for a moment. "Tell me," he said. "Albright found 2 additional problems with Victor's documentation," she said. "Beyond the notary. One of the witness signatures on the custody petition is from a man who died in 1886. The other," she stopped. "The other is my signature. On a document I never signed, consenting to Victor's guardianship." The bench got very still. "A forged signature," Silas said. Yes, he was quiet for a moment. "I know." "That's not a civil matter anymore," he said. "That's fraud. Possibly forgery under federal statute." "I know," she said again. Her voice was steady, but her hand on Lily's back was pressing slightly harder than necessary. "Albright told me he's referring the documentation to the federal circuit. There will be an investigation." She paused. "Victor's not going to walk away from this with a defeat in a territorial court. He's going to walk away from it with a federal inquiry into his banking and legal practices." The thing that happened to Silas in that moment was complicated. Part of it was satisfaction, the clean, clear satisfaction of watching something unjust begin to come apart at its foundations. Part of it was something older and quieter, the feeling of watching a woman who had carried an impossible weight for 6 weeks finally feel the ground become solid under her feet. "What did Albright say to Victor?" he asked. "I don't know exactly." A pause. "I could hear some of it through the door." Albright's voice carries. She looked at her hands. "He used the phrase abusive process 3 times. Silas nodded slowly. "Victor came out of that room and he looked at me," Evelyn said. "In the hallway. Just the 2 of us for a moment before his lawyer got to him. And I expected him to say something. Threaten something. He always has a next move." She shook her head slightly. "He just looked at me, and then he walked past." "What did you see on his face?" Silas asked. She thought about it. "The look of a man who'd run a calculation and come out the wrong side of it," she said. "Not angry, not yet, just accounting. He's going to lawyer up harder and fight the federal referral," Silas said. "Yes," she agreed, "he will, but he's going to fight it from a retreat, not an advance." She looked up at him. "He came here to take Lily. He's leaving without her, and with a federal inquiry attached to his name. That's not a position from which you press forward." The courthouse door opened, and Albright came out and stood at the top of the steps. The crowd that had been waiting, and they had been waiting. All of Harwick apparently, nobody had gone anywhere, went quiet. In the matter of Brooks versus Brooks, Albright said, this court finds insufficient legal basis for the transfer of custody. The Missouri Circuit Court ruling is held in abeyance, pending federal review of the documentation underlying it. He looked out at the crowd. The child Lily Brooks remains in the legal custody of her mother Evelyn Brooks. He paused. I will also note for the record that this court takes a serious view of the conduct demonstrated in this proceeding and has filed a corresponding report with the Federal Circuit. He looked at Victor, who was standing to one side with his lawyer and 2 hired men. Mr. Brooks, you are free to return to Missouri. I would strongly suggest you consult with counsel about your current legal exposure before taking any further action in this matter. Victor said nothing. His face was very still and very controlled and told Silas absolutely nothing. Albright went back inside. The crowd was not as controlled. The exhale that went through Harwick in that moment was something Silas would remember for the rest of his life, not loud, not celebratory exactly, but the sound of people who had witnessed something right happen and felt the particular relief of that. Martha put her hand on Evelyn's arm. Tom Geller shook Silas's hand. Doc Harlan said something that Silas didn't catch because he was watching Evelyn. She was looking at Lily. Just looking at her, the way you look at something you were afraid of losing and have just been told you can keep. The fear coming out of her all at once, slowly, like pressure releasing from something that had been sealed for too long. Lily put both hands on her mother's face the way she did sometimes. Like she was making sure. Evelyn's composure broke. Not loudly, not in a way she couldn't control, but her eyes filled and she let them, just for that moment. Just for those few seconds while the crowd moved around them, and she held her daughter's face in both hands and pressed her forehead to Lily's small warm head. Silas looked away. That moment wasn't for him, but he felt it in his chest all the same. Victor left Harwick that afternoon. Silas didn't see him go, but Tom did, and Tom told him later that Victor's carriage pulled away from the hotel around 2 o'clock without ceremony, the 2 hired men riding behind him, and that Victor had not spoken to anyone or said goodbye to the clerk who'd served him for 3 days, and in Victor's world probably didn't warrant a goodbye. Gone, just like that. It should have felt like more than it did. 6 weeks of running, 3 states, a forged signature on a legal document. And the man responsible climbed into a carriage and went back to Missouri, and that was that, at least for now, at least in Harwick. But Evelyn didn't feel it was over. Silas could tell. She sat at the table that evening, the way she'd sat at tables before working, organizing, her pen moving across paper, but with a quality of alertness that hadn't left her. Like an animal that's been chased so long, it doesn't entirely believe the chase has stopped when the sound of running feet disappears. He's gone, Silas said. I know, she didn't look up. Albright's referral is going to keep him occupied for a while. I know that too. She set down her pen. I'm not worried about Victor right now. He waited. I'm trying to figure out what comes next, she said. For us. For Lily and me. She looked at the papers in front of her, Nathan's ledger, the deed, the letters from his father. All the things she'd carried inside a baby's blanket lining across 3 states. The farm in Missouri, Victor filed it, but if the federal referral goes the way Albright thinks it will, the filing could be voided. I might be able to go back, she paused. Nathan's farm. Lily's birthright. Silas was quiet. That's what I should do, she said. She was looking at the ledger, not at him. Go back. Fight to reclaim it. It's Nathan's land. It's what he worked for. It's what he wanted Lily to have. Yes, Silas said carefully. That sounds right. She looked up then, and he saw on her face the same thing he'd been trying not to show on his, which was that right and wanted were 2 different directions, and she was trying to figure out which one led where. I need to ask you something, she said. All right. And I need you to be honest with me. Not kind, honest. I'm generally both, he said. Something moved across her face that wasn't quite a smile, but lived in the same neighborhood. Do you held her gaze? No, he said. You asked for honest, he said. No, I don't want you to go. But that's not a deciding factor here. This is your life and Lily's life, and I don't have a claim on either of them. She stopped. Started again. You stayed up all night with a child that wasn't yours. You gave her a cradle you built for a boy you never got to hold. You stood on your own front porch and pointed a powerful man at me instead of negotiating with him yourself, which would have been easier and safer and probably better for you. Her voice was steady, but there was something underneath it that wasn't. That's not nothing, Silas. No, it isn't. Then what is it? He thought about how to say it. About whether to say it here now, with everything still so new and uncertain and raw. About whether the right time was ever going to feel like the right time, or whether waiting for the right time was just another word for afraid. It's the beginning of something, he said quietly. If you want it to be. And I'm not saying that to complicate your decision about Missouri. I'm saying it because you asked for honest, and that's the honest answer. She looked at him for a long moment. The fire was low. Lily was asleep in Thomas's cradle. She'd been sleeping in it every night since the night before the hearing, like she'd always slept there, like it had been made for her all along. The beginning of something, Evelyn said. Yeah. That's a considerable thing to put in front of a woman who just got finished fighting for her life, she said. I know. I'm sorry for the timing. She looked at her hands. Then she looked at the cradle. Then she looked at him. I'm not going anywhere tonight, she said. I know. And I'm not going anywhere tomorrow. I know that too. Beyond that, she said slowly, I don't have an answer. I don't know yet. That's fair, he said. She nodded. She picked up her pen. She went back to the papers, but the quality of the silence in the room had changed into something different from what it had been before he'd said what he'd said. Not easier exactly, but more honest. More like what was actually true between them rather than the careful version they'd been maintaining. He sat there with his coffee going cold and listened to the pen moving and the fire settling and the small sounds Lily made in her sleep, and he thought about the question she'd asked him on the porch the day Victor came. You don't know me. We've been here barely 2 weeks. You don't owe us anything. He thought about the answer he hadn't quite given her then. About how knowing didn't always take long, and owing had nothing to do with it. About how some things you recognized, not because you'd reasoned your way to them, but because they arrived already true, and the only question left was what you were going to do about it. The pen stopped. He looked up. Evelyn was looking at the cradle. He would have loved her, she said softly. Not to Silas, really. More to the room, to the night, to Nathan Brooks, who'd gotten 22 days of fatherhood before a horse took it away. He would have been absolutely ridiculous about her. Carrying her every wrongs. A pause. He made up terrible songs. Silas said nothing. He let that have the space it needed. I think he would have liked you, she said then. She looked at Silas. That's not a small thing. Nathan didn't like many people. I'll take it, Silas said. She looked at him a moment longer, with something in her eyes that he filed away carefully, not pressing on it, not naming it yet. Then she went back to her papers, and he sat with his cold coffee. And outside the Wyoming night settled around the ranch house the way it did, vast and cold and full of stars, and inside there was warmth, and the sound of a pen and a sleeping baby, and two people sitting in the particular silence of people who have said something true and are learning to live inside it. She didn't go to Missouri. Not the next day, not the week after, not the month after that. And the thing was, she didn't announce it. She didn't sit down and tell him she'd made a decision. She just kept waking up before he did, and making coffee and balancing the ranch accounts, and carrying Lily on her hip through the morning work, and the days kept accumulating, and neither of them said anything about Missouri. And gradually the subject settled into the floor of the house, the way certain subjects do, not forgotten, not avoided, just waiting to see if it still needed to be a question. November came in hard that year. Cold that arrived early and meant business, the kind that cracked the water trough by the third week, and sent the cattle pressing together in the east pasture, looking for warmth they were going to have to generate themselves. Silas worked longer days than he had in years. And Evelyn worked alongside him, not out in the pasture, but keeping everything behind him running, so that when he came in cold and spent at the end of the day, there was something worth coming into. She'd started keeping a second ledger. He found it one evening by accident, left open on the kitchen table when she'd gone to settle Lily. It wasn't his accounts. It was a projection: feed costs against expected cattle weight gain, repair costs for the east fence line, projected income from the spring cattle drive against winter expenditures. It was his ranch, mapped out in her handwriting, 6 months into the future, with notes in the margins about where the numbers were soft and what could be done about them. He stood there looking at it for a long moment. She came back in and saw him looking and didn't apologize. "The east fence is going to cost more than you budgeted," she said. "The post count is off. Whoever measured it last did it wrong." "That was me," he said. "I know." She picked up the ledger. "I fixed the calculation. You're going to need to order 18 additional posts before February." He looked at her. She looked at him. "Why are you planning my ranch 6 months out?" he said. She set the ledger down, smoothed the cover with her palm. "Because somebody has to," she said. "And because I'm good at it." A pause. "And because—" stopped, he said. She met his eyes. "Because I want to," she said quietly. "Is that enough of a reason?" It was more than enough, and they both knew it. And neither of them pushed it further right then, because the thing between them was delicate, still in the way that new things are delicate. And they'd both learned the same lesson from their losses, that you could love something hard and still lose it, and that knowledge made you careful in ways you hadn't been careful before. But he ordered the 18 posts the next week, and she was right about the count. The letter from Missouri arrived on a Tuesday in late November, carried out from Harwick by Tom Geller, who'd been holding it for 3 days because the weather had kept everyone off the roads. It was from a federal circuit clerk, formal and dry in the way federal correspondence always was. 3 pages of legal language that Evelyn read at the kitchen table with the focused expression she used for things that required her full attention. Silas sat across from her and waited. She read it twice. Then she set it down. "The federal inquiry has expanded," she said. "Beyond the documents Victor filed against me, they found 2 other cases, women in similar situations who filed complaints after Nathan's death became known in the circuit. Victor apparently had a pattern." She looked at the letter. The lien document, the forged signature. These weren't the first times he'd done it. Silas was very still. "How many?" "3 other cases the clerk knows of," she said. "Possibly more." She looked up. "The Cooper County judge who ruled against me has been suspended pending review. The federal circuit is treating this as a coordinated fraud scheme, not just individual misconduct." The weight of that settled over the kitchen. "Nathan's farm," Silas said carefully. "The filing against it has been voided," Evelyn said. "Effective as of last week. The farm is mine. Legally, clearly, without question." She pressed her fingers flat on the letter. "I can go back any time I want." The fire crackled. Lily made a sound from the cradle in the back room, the small, restless sound she made when she was deciding whether to wake up or go back to sleep. They both waited. The sound stopped. "Evelyn," Silas said. "Don't," she said. "I wasn't going to say anything." "You were thinking it loud enough that you didn't need to." She looked at him steadily. "You were going to say something careful and reasonable about it being my decision and my life, which is true, and then you were going to step back and wait, which is what you always do. You step back and you wait because you think that's respectful, and it is respectful, but right now it's also—" She stopped. "Also what?" he said. "Frustrating," she said. "It's also frustrating." He looked at her. "All right, I need you to say what you actually think," she said. "Not the careful version. Not the version that gives me every possible exit and doesn't ask anything of me. The real version." He sat with that for a moment. She waited, which she was good at. "I think," he said slowly, "that Nathan's farm is Nathan's farm, and I never want you to feel like you gave up something that was his and Lily's because of me." He paused. "And I think that this ranch has more life in it now than it's had in 4 years, and that I have more life in me now than I've had in 4 years. And that walking out to the barn in the morning and knowing I'm coming back to something to you and to Lily is a thing I didn't know I was missing until it was there." He looked at her. "That's the real version." She held his gaze for a long moment. Something moved through her expression, complex and quiet, the way things moved through Evelyn's expression when they mattered enough to cost her something. "Nathan's farm," she said, "is 40 acres in Missouri that I worked hard and loved genuinely. This ranch is 400 acres in Wyoming, with better water access and a man who built a cradle with his own hands and sat up all night with my daughter when she had a fever." She looked at the letter. "Nathan would not want me spending my life honoring his memory at the expense of building a new one. He was not that kind of man." "You don't have to decide today," Silas said. "I'm deciding now," she said. "Because if I leave the decision open, it becomes a question between us that sits in the room every day. And I've had enough things sitting in rooms." She picked up the letter, folded it carefully, and set it on the stack of her organized papers. "I'm not going back to Missouri. I'm going to deed Nathan's farm to his parents if they want it, and if they don't, I'll sell it and put the money into Lily's future." She looked at him. "This is where we're staying." The word we landed in the room and neither of them moved. "All right," Silas said. "All right," she agreed. They sat there in the particular silence of two people who have just changed the direction of their lives and are taking a moment to feel the weight of that before they go back to the work in front of them. Then Lily woke up for real, announcing herself with the direct and uncomplicated authority she'd been developing, and Evelyn went to get her, and Silas put more coffee on, and the morning went forward. December was the kind of month that tested what you were made of, out on the Wyoming range. The cold went deep and stayed, and the work didn't stop for it. Animals didn't care about the temperature, they just got hungrier and more demanding. And the fence line that had needed attention since October required 2 full days of Silas's time in conditions that would have kept a lesser man indoors. He came in both evenings, barely able to feel his hands, and found Evelyn had kept the stove going and dinner ready, and Lily awake and waiting in a way that Lily had apparently decided was her personal responsibility. The baby had developed a relationship with Silas that operated on her terms entirely, which he found completely acceptable. She had decided he was for carrying and for the particular game she'd invented, where she grabbed his beard stubble with both hands and pulled, which she found funnier than he did. She'd also decided he was the appropriate person to complain to when something was wrong, which meant she'd look directly at him and say something emphatic and incoherent and expect him to fix it. "She's telling you the cat came inside again," Evelyn said one evening without looking up from the stove. "How do you know that's what she's saying?" "Because she makes that exact sound when the cat comes inside." The cat, a large, opinionated gray animal that had arrived at the ranch the previous spring from nowhere and declined to leave, had indeed come inside and was sitting next to the woodbox with the expression of something that had made its decision and wasn't interested in discussion. Silas looked at Lily. Lily looked at the cat. Then she looked at Silas and said something that was clearly a directive. "You're right," he told her. "It's too cold for him outside." Lily appeared satisfied. The cat did not appear to care one way or the other. Evelyn set dinner on the table and looked at the two of them, Silas with Lily on his knee, both of them having apparently resolved the cat situation, and the expression on her face was the unguarded one. The one she couldn't always prevent when she wasn't paying attention to what she was feeling. She caught him seeing it and looked away. "Dinner," she said. "Yeah," he said. Christmas came with 6 inches of snow, and the Geller family and the Harlan family, and 3 other ranching families from the surrounding area, all of whom had apparently decided collectively that Silas Mercer's ranch was where Christmas was happening this year. Martha had organized it without anyone officially authorizing her to, which was how Martha operated, and Evelyn had been recruited without quite agreeing to be recruited, and the result was the ranch house fuller than it had been in years. Maybe fuller than it had ever been, with children running through it and people crowded around the table and food that Evelyn and Martha had been working on for 2 days, filling every surface. Silas stood in the doorway between the main room and the kitchen at one point during the evening and watched all of it, and felt something he hadn't felt in so long he'd almost forgotten what it was called. Not happiness, exactly happiness was too light a word for it. More like fullness, the sense of a life that had gotten filled back up after being emptied. Lily fell asleep in his arms around 8 o'clock, in the middle of a conversation between Martha and Doc Harlan about a medical situation that neither Silas nor Lily had any business being part of. He just sat there with her while the conversation went on around him, and Lily's weight got heavier in the way sleeping babies got heavier, and he looked across the room at Evelyn, who was laughing at something Tom Geller's youngest had said. And he thought clearly, and without complication, for the first time, without immediately pulling back from the thought that this was what he wanted for the rest of his life. This room, these people, this woman, this baby who had grabbed his finger her first night here, and apparently not let go since. He didn't say it, it wasn't the moment for saying it. But he thought it, all the way through, and let himself think it, and that felt like something. Evelyn looked across the room and found his eyes. She looked at him holding Lily, and then she looked at him, just him, and something passed between them over the heads of all those people that didn't need words and didn't want any. Then Martha said something that required her attention, and she looked away, and Silas looked down at the sleeping baby in his arms, and the evening went on. The letter from Nathan's parents arrived in January. His mother, a woman named Clara Brooks who'd written in a handwriting that looked like someone who'd spent a lifetime being precise, said two things. First, that she was grateful the truth had come out about Victor, with whom she'd had a painful and estranged relationship for 30 years, and who had disappointed her in ways she'd never fully disclosed to Nathan because she hadn't wanted to burden him. Second, that she didn't want the farm. She wrote, Evelyn, that land was Nathan's life's work and he would want it to go toward building Lily's future in whatever form makes sense to you. You were the best thing that happened to my son. Whatever you build next, build it well. Evelyn read the letter at the table and then set it down very carefully and sat very still for a moment. Silas was across from her. He watched her read it and watched her set it down and watched her stillness. You all right? He asked. She knew, Evelyn said, about Victor. She knew for 30 years, and she protected Nathan from it because she didn't want him to carry it. She pressed her hand flat on the letter. She carried it herself all that time. Some mothers do that, Silas said. It cost her. Evelyn looked up. Her eyes were bright but controlled. She watched Victor use her grief about Nathan to go after me and Lily, and she couldn't stop it because coming forward would have meant admitting she'd known things for 30 years, and hadn't. She stopped. I'm not angry at her. I want to be clear about that. I understand why she did what she did, but it cost her a lot. What are you going to write back? He asked. She looked at the letter for a moment. I'm going to invite her to visit, she said. Lily should know her grandmother. She paused. Whatever else is complicated, Lily should know her grandmother. Silas nodded. That's right, she looked at him. You don't mind having Nathan's mother? Of course I don't mind, he said. This is your home. Both of yours. Your family comes with you. She held his gaze and he held hers, and the word home sat in the space between them, the first time she'd heard him say it about her and Lily that plainly, and he saw the moment it landed. Thank you, she said softly. Don't thank me for being reasonable, he said. I'm not thanking you for being reasonable, she said. I'm thanking you for meaning it. He asked her in February. He'd planned to wait until spring felt right. Felt like the correct season for the kind of thing he wanted to say. But February didn't cooperate with his planning, because February brought a blizzard that lasted 4 days and kept them both indoors with nowhere to go and nothing to do but be. Exactly where they were, and on the third evening of the blizzard, he ran out of reasons to keep waiting. Lily was asleep. The storm was doing its work outside. They were sitting by the fire the way they'd sat 100 times by then, comfortable in it, easy in each other's silence, and he looked at her across the fire and said, before he thought better of it, I want to ask you something. She looked up from the letter she'd been writing. All right. He leaned forward, put his elbows on his knees, looked at her directly the way she'd always looked at him, because she'd taught him without meaning to that direct was better. If you had never been running, he said. If Nathan had never died, and Victor had never come, and there was no reason you needed to be anywhere but where you chose to be. If it was just a free decision, nothing pushing you anywhere. He paused. Would you be here? She looked at him. Something moved through her expression, not surprise because she was rarely surprised, but the quality of someone who had been asked the question they'd been asking themselves and was deciding whether to answer it fully. Silas, she said. I mean it, he said. I'm not asking to pressure you. I'm asking because I need to know whether what we've built here is built on necessity or built on something real, and I need to hear it from you because I can't figure it out on my own. She set the letter down. When you stopped your wagon, she said slowly, I was at the end of what I had. 6 weeks of running, sick baby, no money, no plan past the next hour. I was not in a position to feel anything except survival. She looked at the fire. The first week here, I kept waiting for the catch. For the thing that would happen, that would tell me this wasn't what it looked like. She looked back at him. It never came. You gave Lily a cradle, she said. You built that cradle for your own son, and you gave it to my daughter, and you didn't make anything of it, you just handed it over. Like it was simple. Her voice was very steady, but the steadiness was doing work. And I thought, what kind of man does that? What kind of man hands over the most painful thing he owns because his baby needs somewhere warm to sleep? The kind of man who decided a long time ago that he was going to help when he could, Silas said. Yes, she said, that's exactly what kind of man. She held his gaze. I didn't come here on a free decision. You're right about that. I was pushed here by grief and fear and a man who wanted to take my daughter. She paused. But I stayed on a free decision. Every single morning I woke up and chose to stay. Not because I had nowhere else to go. I had Missouri. I had the farm. I had a grandmother who would have helped. She shook her head. I stayed because this is where I wanted to be. Because you're who I wanted to be near. The fire snapped. The storm pushed at the windows. Then I want to ask you properly, he said. He stood up. Not because he'd planned to stand, he just found himself on his feet, which felt right. I don't have a ring yet. The weather being what it is, that's going to have to wait for spring. But I don't want to wait for spring to ask. He looked at her. Evelyn Brooks, will you marry me? It wasn't a question when he said it. It came out flat and sure, the way things came out of him when he meant them completely. She looked up at him from the chair, and then she stood too, which she hadn't planned to either, and they were both standing in front of the fire in the middle of a blizzard. And she looked at him with those dark, steady eyes that had never once in all the weeks he'd known her looked away from what was true. I married Nathan when I was 20, she said. I loved him fully, and I have no regret about any day of it. A pause. I'm 24 now. I have a daughter and a dead husband, and a federal court case attached to my name, and exactly what I'm wearing, more or less, to my name in terms of property. She looked at him. I am not an easy thing to take on. I didn't ask you because you were easy, he said. Something broke open in her expression. Not tears, not quite. But the particular look of someone whose last defense has just been dissolved by the exact right words. Yes, she said. Yes, Silas, I'll marry you. He crossed to her in 2 steps and she reached up and put her hand against his face and he covered it with his. And they stood there in the firelight while the blizzard worked outside, and Lily slept in Thomas's cradle, and the ranch house held them the way it had been holding them for months, steadily, quietly. Like a thing that had been waiting for exactly this. He rode into Harwick the first clear day in March and came back with a ring that Martha Geller had helped him select because he'd admitted he didn't entirely know what he was looking for, and Martha's had said she'd been waiting for him to ask. It was a simple thin gold band, small pale stone the color of the morning sky, and he brought it home and set it on the table in front of Evelyn while she was in the middle of the ranch accounts. She looked at it, then she looked at him. I said yes in February, she said. I know, he said. This is for the permanent record. She picked it up, held it, turned it in the light. Then she set it down again. Put it on properly, she said. He picked it up. He took her left hand, the one with the pen callus and the ink stain she couldn't entirely get out, and he put the ring on her finger. She looked at it for a moment. Then she picked up her pen and went back to the accounts. He stood there. "The fence invoice is wrong," she said. "They charged you for 60 posts, but the delivery receipt says 58. Evelyn, I'll write them a letter." She paused. "Silas." "Yeah." She looked up from the ledger, and the look on her face, not the composed one, not the careful one, the real one underneath all of those, was the most unguarded thing he'd ever seen. "I'm very happy," she said simply, like it was the plainest fact in the world. He sat down across from her. "Me too," he said. She went back to the fence invoice. He went back to his coffee, and the ring caught the morning light every time she turned a page, and the house was warm, and outside the Wyoming winter was finally beginning to lose its grip on the land. Neither of them said anything more about it. They didn't need to. Some things were finished being decided and just needed to be lived now. And this was one of those things, and they both knew it. And the knowing of it settled around them like something they'd been carrying toward each other for a long time had finally been set down in exactly the right place. They married on a Saturday in April, when the ground had finally thawed enough to feel like the world was interested in living again. The church in Harwick held every person who'd witnessed the past 6 months of their story: Martha and Tom Geller in the front row, Doc Harlan beside them, 3 ranching families packed into the remaining pews, and a handful of people Silas had known for a decade, who'd driven 2 hours through uncertain spring roads because word had gotten out and nobody wanted to miss it. Evelyn wore a dress that Martha had quietly produced from somewhere without being asked: pale blue wool, simple cut, fitted at the waist with a small row of buttons down the back that Evelyn had fastened herself in the mirror of the guest room at the Gellers' house that morning, with the focused patience she brought to everything. She'd put her dark hair up. She wore the ring he'd given her in March. She carried Lily on her hip up the aisle, because Lily had made it extremely clear she had no intention of sitting with anyone else, and the congregation had laughed, and Evelyn had smiled. And Silas had stood at the front of that church and watched them come to him and felt the particular quality of a man, something he had not earned and could not deserve, and was going to spend the rest of his life being grateful for anyway. The minister asked his questions. They answered them. Silas put his hand over hers when it came time to, and Lily grabbed 2 of his fingers and held on, which the minister incorporated into the ceremony with the ease of a man who'd married enough Wyoming ranchers to know that improvisation was part of the job. When it was done, Martha cried. Tom did not cry, but he came close, which for Tom was the equivalent. Doc Harlan shook Silas's hand with both of his and said, "It's good to see you back," and Silas knew he didn't mean back in the church. He meant back in the world, back in the living of it. "Yes," Silas said, "it is." Spring opened up the ranch in a way that Silas hadn't fully let it open in 4 years. He'd been working the land because the land required it, maintaining it the way you maintain something you're responsible for, but no longer love. That changed. He couldn't have said exactly when it changed, somewhere between the fence repair in December and the morning in February when he'd asked Evelyn to marry him, but by the time the ground thawed and the cattle moved back to the east pasture, and the first growth came up in the south fields, he was working differently. With intention, with the future in it, Evelyn noticed. She noticed everything. "You fixed the gate on the north side," she said one evening. He'd come in from a long day and she was at the stove. "It's been broken 3 years," he said. "I know, I've been watching you decide to fix it and then not fix it since I got here." She handed him coffee without turning around. What made today the day? He thought about it. Figured Lily would be walking the property by summer, he said. Don't want a broken gate on the property a walking baby has access to. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "She's going to be running the property by summer. She barely walks anymore. Walking's too slow for her." He smiled. She heard it in the silence somehow and smiled back at the stove. Lily had taken her first real steps in the ranch house in March, 3 weeks before the wedding. Lurching from the edge of the kitchen table to the chair, with the concentrated fury of someone who had decided this was happening today, regardless of what her body thought about it. She'd made it 4 steps and then sat down hard and looked up at Silas with an expression that said she was going to pretend that was the plan all along. Good, Silas had told her. She'd pulled herself up and done it again. By April she was walking. By May she was doing the thing Evelyn had predicted. Walking was beneath her. She had places to be. And she moved through the ranch house with the directional confidence of someone who knew exactly where she was going, even when she demonstrably did not. She also talked now. Not in words anyone could entirely decode, but with conviction and volume and a clear expectation that she was being understood. And she distributed her talking equally between Evelyn and Silas, with the fairness of someone who had decided both of them were equally hers, and she wasn't going to pretend otherwise. Silas had stopped pretending otherwise, too. The letter from the Federal Circuit came in May. Evelyn read it at the table, which was where she read everything important, with the same focused expression she brought to Nathan's old accounts. Silas was across from her. He'd learned to read the quality of her stillness. This was not the bad kind. She set it down. Victor has entered a plea agreement, she said. Silas waited. Fraud, forgery, and abusive legal process. 3 counts. He's agreed to full financial restitution to all affected parties, surrender of his bank's operating license in Missouri. And she paused, looked at the letter again. 5 years probationary oversight of all his remaining financial activities. No prison, she agreed, but no bank. No legal authority. No ability to file another claim without federal oversight. She looked up. He's done, not punished the way I'd have wanted, but done. How do you feel about that? He asked. She considered it the way she considered things, fully, without rushing. I wanted him in a cell, she said honestly. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. He forged my name. He tried to take my daughter. He did the same thing to other women who didn't have what I had, the documents, the judge, you. She pressed her hand flat on the letter. But those other women are getting restitution. Their cases are on record. And Victor is finished. She looked at Silas. I think Nathan would say that's enough. That justice doesn't always look like what you want it to look like. What do you, Silas asked. She was quiet for a moment. I say it's enough, she said, and I say I'm done letting him take up space in my head that belongs to more important things. She folded the letter. Set it on the pile of correspondence she kept in the corner of the kitchen. That's the last time I'm going to think about Victor Brooks. She picked up her pen and went back to the ranch accounts. Silas sat across from her and drank his coffee and thought that there was something almost frightening about the capacity of this woman to decide something and mean it. To close a door and leave it closed, not because she was suppressing anything, but because she had genuinely finished with it and had more important work to do. He thought it was one of the finest things about her. He'd thought so since the first week. Clara Brooks arrived in June, Nathan's mother. She'd written 3 letters before coming, each one carefully worded, each one clearly written by a woman who wasn't sure of her welcome and was trying to earn it through precision and honesty rather than assumption. Evelyn had written back 3 times, each letter warmer than the last. And by the time Clara's wagon came up the road from Harwick, the correspondence between them had the quality of 2 people who had been cautious with each other and had gotten through the caution to something real. She was a small woman, 60 years old, with Nathan's eyes and the particular stillness of someone who'd carried a great deal of grief with great privacy. She climbed down from the wagon and looked at the ranch house. And then she looked at Evelyn, who was standing on the porch with Lily on her hip. Lily looked at her, the frank total assessment of a baby evaluating a new person. Clara looked at Lily for a long moment and said nothing, and her face did something that she didn't try to control. She has his hands, Clara said. Her voice was steady, but it cost her. I know, Evelyn said softly. Come inside. Silas made himself scarce for the first hour, because that reunion wasn't his, and he understood that clearly. He worked the fence on the far side of the property, and came back when he judged enough time had passed. And he found the 2 women at the kitchen table, with Lily between them on the table surface, playing a game that appeared to involve passing a wooden spoon back and forth with great ceremony. Clara looked up when he came in. She had the eyes of someone who'd been crying and wasn't embarrassed about it. "Mr. Mercer," Silas, he said, "please." She looked at him with the particular directness of a woman, sizing up the man who'd married her dead son's wife, which was its own complicated thing. He stood still and let her look. "Evelyn tells me you found them on the road in a rainstorm," she said. "Yes, ma'am. She tells me you stayed up all night with Lily when she had fever." "Yes, ma'am." Clara looked at Lily, who had won the wooden spoon and was examining it with satisfaction. Nathan would have she stopped, steadied. He would have wanted someone who did that. "For them." She looked back at Silas. "I want you to know that." Silas didn't have a response that was adequate, so he just nodded, and she seemed to understand that the nod was the full answer. He poured coffee and brought it to both of them, and sat at the end of the table at a careful distance, and listened to Clara ask Evelyn about the federal case, and about the farm decision, and about the ring, and about the wedding. And gradually, over the course of that first hour, the tension of uncertainty that Clara had carried into the house released, and she began to talk like a woman who was in a place where she was welcome, because she was. Later that evening, Clara was sitting with Lily on her lap in the chair by the fire, telling her something in a low voice, not a story exactly, more like a description of Nathan as a boy, of his first horse, of the way he'd laughed. Evelyn was at the table. Silas was near the window. He looked at Evelyn. She was watching Clara and Lily with an expression that was grief and gratitude in equal measure, the particular combination that comes when someone you loved is being genuinely honored by someone who loved them first and longest. She felt him looking, turned, met his eyes. He didn't say anything. Neither did she. But she reached out and found at his table and held it briefly, and he held hers back, and Clara kept talking to Lily about a boy who had grown into a man and loved well and left behind more than he'd known. The summer was the fullest Silas could remember. The cattle came through the heat well. The south field produced better than his projections. And Evelyn's second ledger, the one she'd started in November, that he'd found by accident, and which had since been formalized into the official ranch account system, showed numbers that were better than any year since he'd been keeping records. She'd found 2 additional errors in his historical accounting, corrected them without ceremony, and noted in the margin that she'd be watching those line items going forward. He'd told her she was welcome to watch anything she wanted. She'd told him that was an extremely poor negotiating position, and he should work on that. Lily walked through that summer like she owned the property, which she increasingly seemed to believe she did. She was particular about things about which cup was hers, about the order in which she expected her morning to proceed, about Silas's hat, which she had decided was communal property, regardless of his opinion on the matter. She wore it around the house with the front tilted down over her eyes and walked into walls with complete dignity. "She's going to be trouble," Evelyn said one morning watching this. "She already is trouble," Silas said. "More trouble," Evelyn said. "Organized trouble. She's already planning things." He looked at the baby in his hat, walking with intent purpose toward the cat, who had learned to regard her approach as a weather event requiring preparation. "God help us," he said. Evelyn laughed full and clear and unguarded, the way she laughed now routinely, not just when she wasn't paying attention to herself. It still hit him the same way it had the first time he'd heard it, which he figured was probably how it was going to be for the rest of his life, and he found he had absolutely no objection to that. She told him in August. They were sitting on the porch after supper, the long summer evening going gold around them, Lily asleep inside in the cradle that Thomas had never slept in and Lily had made entirely hers. Evelyn had been quiet through dinner in a particular way, the thinking kind of quiet. He'd let her think because he'd learned the difference between the kinds of quiet, and this one didn't require interruption. She said, "Silas, yeah, I need to tell you something." He looked at her. She was looking at her hands in her lap, which she rarely did. Evelyn Brooks looked at the thing she was talking about. Not away from it. "I'm expecting," she said. The evening went very still. He looked at her profile in the gold light. She turned to look at him, and her expression was doing the complicated thing it did when she was feeling more than she knew how to contain, but was containing it anyway out of habit. How long have you known, he said. 3 weeks, she said. I wanted to be certain before I told you. I wanted to not, she paused. I didn't want to tell you and then have it not. She stopped again. He understood, after what she'd been through, after the grief and the loss and the long, careful road to where they were. She hadn't wanted to hand him something that might be taken back. Evelyn, he said. I'm not scared, she said quickly. I want to be clear about that. I'm not scared, I'm. She looked at her hands again. I don't have a word for what I am. I do, he said. She looked up. Glad, he said. That's what I am. Just glad. Her composure broke the way it broke when it broke, not dramatically, not in collapse, just in the sudden absence of the effort it took to maintain it. Her eyes filled and she let them, and she looked at him with all of it showing, the hope and the fear and the gladness underneath both of them. He reached over and took her hand. She held on. We're going to be all right, he said. I know, she said. I know that. She pressed his hand. I just needed to hear you say it. We're going to be more than all right, he said. We're going to be exactly what this ranch has been waiting to be. She laughed at that, through the bright eyes, and the laugh was the real one, and he kept hold of her hand, and they sat there in the gold August evening, while the Wyoming summer went about its ancient business around them. They named him Samuel, born in March, the following spring, in the ranch house with Doc Harlan present and Martha Geller in the kitchen, making enough food to feed everyone who would come by in the days following. Because Martha operated on the principle that every significant life event required adequate provisions. He was a large, loud baby with Silas's coloring and Evelyn's eyes and absolutely no patience for waiting for anything. He announced his arrival with the full convictions of someone who had opinions and intended to share them immediately. And he continued in this manner for the entirety of his first hours in the world, while Evelyn held him, and ceaseless sat on the edge of the bed and looked at them both. Lily had been brought in by Martha to meet her brother, and stood at the edge of the bed with the expression of someone conducting an evaluation. She looked at Samuel for a long time. Samuel looked at nothing in particular and communicated forcefully about it. Then Lily looked at Silas. Mine, she said. It was one of her clear words. She'd been collecting them recently. Yours, Silas confirmed. She appeared to accept this. She patted Samuel's head once with the flat of her hand, with the proprietary gentleness of a 19-month-old who had decided the matter was settled, and then she turned and held her arms up to Silas to be picked up, which was her standard response to situations she had processed and moved on from. He picked her up. He held his daughter on one arm and looked at his wife holding his son, and the room was full and warm and loud, with Samuel's vigorous communication and the sound of Martha in the kitchen and Doc Harlan's steady voice. And Silas Mercer stood in the middle of all of it and felt the exact shape of his own life for the first time in years. Not the absence of grief, he would always carry what he'd lost, Margaret and Thomas, and the version of his life that had ended in a single afternoon 4 years ago. But grief and fullness could occupy the same space. He knew that now. The cradle that had held one baby's memory had held another baby's living warmth, and the loss hadn't diminished, the life had simply grown larger than the loss. Evelyn looked up from Samuel and found his eyes the way she always found his eyes, like she had a compass, and he was the direction it pointed. He's going to be loud, she said. He's already loud, Silas said. He gets that from you, she said. I'm not loud, he said. You're not quiet, she said. There's a range between those two things, and you're on the wrong side of the middle. She looked down at Samuel, who had decreased his volume slightly, and was now examining the ceiling with the focused attention of someone who has just discovered that ceilings exist. He's beautiful. Yeah, Silas said. He is. Thomas would have been she started, and stopped, and he knew what she'd meant to say, the particular sentence a woman speaks when she is thinking of the people who should have been in a room and aren't. She'd learned to say Margaret's name easily. He'd learned to hear it without flinching. That was something 4 years and one right person had built between them. Thomas would have been good with him, Silas has said. And with Lily, he'd have been good at all of it. Evelyn pressed her cheek to Samuel's head. Yes, she said softly. He would have been. The room held them, all 4 of them, The family that had been built not from a single plan or a single bloodline, but from a rainstorm and a decision and a man who had pulled his wagon to a stop on a dark road, because his horse threw her head and there was a woman standing in the dark, holding a baby, and he had decided, in the simple wordless way he decided most things, that he was going to help. Summer came around again, Lily's second summer, Samuel's first. Lily had abandoned walking entirely in favor of running, as predicted, and had extended her jurisdiction over the ranch to include the barn, the east fence line, and a significant portion of the south field, all of which she patrolled with the same alert authority she brought to the kitchen and the main room, and every other inch of the property she had decided was hers. She had also decided that the cat was hers, which the cat had accepted with the philosophical resignation of an animal who had already made its peace with the absurdity of its situation. Silas found himself one August morning standing at the fence on the south side of the property, watching his children play in the yard. Lily running her circuits, Samuel in Evelyn's arms on the porch, too young for running but watching Lily with the tracking intensity of someone who was taking notes for future reference. Evelyn at the porch rail with her free hand resting on the wood and her face turned slightly toward the sun. He stood at the fence and looked at all of it, at the ranch that had been emptied and had been filled, at the cradle in the back room that had held grief and then held life and would hold life again, at the woman on the porch who had stood in a rainstorm with nothing left and had turned out to be the most capable person he'd ever known, at the two children who had arrived by entirely different roads and were both, without question, entirely his. He thought about the night he'd found them on that road. The rain and the dark, and his horse throwing her head, and the shape of a woman against the weather, holding a bundle that turned out to be a little girl named Lily who would grab his finger that first night and not let go. He had not been looking for anything. He had been heading home through a rainstorm, and he had pulled his wagon to a stop, because it was the right thing to do, and then he had made the next right decision, and then the next one, and then the next. And here he was standing at his own fence in the August heat, with his whole life laid out in front of him, looking nothing like what he'd expected, and exactly like what he'd needed. Evelyn saw him at the fence. She lifted one hand in the small wave she'd developed, not a greeting exactly, more an acknowledgement. "I see you. You're there, we're here." He lifted his hand back. Lily came running toward him from across the yard because she'd seen his gesture and decided it was meant for her, which was Lily's general approach to most things. And she hit the fence post at full speed and grabbed the rail and looked up at him with his hat crooked on her head and her face completely joyful. "Pa," she said. She'd been saying it for a month. Every time it landed the same way. He reached down and picked her up and settled her on his arm. She grabbed his collar with both hands and looked out at the ranch with the proprietary satisfaction of its young, most confident manager. "That's right," he said. "All of it." She patted his shoulder twice in the way that meant she agreed and the matter was settled, and he carried her back toward the porch, toward Evelyn and Samuel and the house that was full of the sound and the weight of living people who had found each other against every reasonable expectation and had chosen, every single day, to stay. The greatest blessing of his life had not arrived on a clear day or a planned afternoon. It had arrived soaking wet in the middle of a Wyoming rainstorm, holding a baby and refusing charity, asking only for shelter and offering in return something. She probably didn't even know she was carrying the possibility of a life that meant something again. He had stopped his wagon for a stranger. The stranger had turned out to be the whole rest of his life. And every morning, when he pulled on his boots in the house that had gone from silent to full, he knew with the bone-deep certainty of a man who has been both lost and found that some storms don't come to destroy you. Some storms come to deliver exactly what you needed and didn't know how to ask for. This one had. And Silas Mercer, widowed rancher, quiet man, keeper of a walnut cradle with a carved horse on the rail, would spend every remaining year of his life being grateful he hadn't driven past.